Hi everyone, as many of you will already know, I'm working on a book arguing that the Trojan migration to Italy and then Gaul and then Britain actually has a historical origin. Now this week, in this video, I wanted to share one little bit of evidence for that. So this isn't anything mind-blowing, this isn't meant to prove it all by itself, but it's one little piece of the puzzle. There are lots of different aspects involved in this argument, and this is just one little bit. So if you think this doesn't prove anything, well, okay, it's not meant to prove the case by itself. But I just wanted to share this one little bit of evidence with you. So the aspect of chariots in the Iliad is quite interesting, because Homer's description of how the Greeks and Trojans used their chariots is very different to how chariots are generally understood to have been used in ancient warfare. So generally, in ancient warfare, like in Mycenaean times, you'd have a whole bunch of chariots all charging at the enemy like true war machines, and then people would be fighting from the chariots. So they would kind of plough through the enemy lines, almost like tanks of the ancient world, kind of, obviously not to the same degree, but that kind of idea of them being true war machines in their own right. Whereas in the Iliad, the descriptions of chariots being used there is completely different. Instead, what we find is that chariots are used almost like just transportation devices. They're used to transport the warriors into the battlefield, and then the warrior jumps off, and then the charioteer takes the chariot back to then basically wait for the warrior to need picking up again, that kind of thing. So it's very, very different to how chariots really were used in the Bronze Age. So this actually has an impact on the issue of when the Trojan War actually took place. But in relation to Britain, the point is that this is a very peculiar way in which chariots were used. That's not to say that it's truly unique, because it isn't. There was actually a tribe in Africa in ancient times that used their chariots in basically the same way. But the point is, it was very, very unusual. Very unusual. So the reason why that's interesting is because Homer's description of the use of chariots by the Trojans and the Greeks in the Iliad is almost identical to the way in which Caesar describes the Britons using their chariots against the Romans when the Romans went there in 55 and 54 BCE. He describes how the charioteer would, well, each chariot would have a charioteer and a warrior, just like in the Iliad, and there would be a bit of fighting from the chariot. The warrior would have a spear that he could use to kill people from the chariot, and we see the same thing in the Iliad as well, but primarily the chariot would be used to take the warrior into the battlefield to kind of disrupt the enemy lines and then drop the warrior off into the battlefield, and then the charioteer would take the chariot away from the fighting and then would wait until the warrior needs picking up again. So that's exactly the same way that we see chariots being used in the Iliad. We see that same peculiar use of chariots among the Britons in ancient pre-Roman times. So because this is such an almost unique use of chariots, it does indicate that, well, perhaps that is indicative of a connection between the Trojans and the Britons. If it was just the same as how all sorts of people all over the Mediterranean use chariots, then it wouldn't be anything special, but the fact that it is so peculiar indicates that there may well be a connection there. Obviously, that's just one piece of evidence. I'm not expecting you to think that this alone proves the case that the Trojans went to Britain. Obviously, it doesn't, but it's just one little piece of the puzzle that I wanted to share with you guys.